All right, grab your Bible, if you will, please. Turn to the book of Job, chapter 22, as we go a little bit further in our study of the book of Job tonight. Now, let me just tell you, we're going to start off very practical, deal with about the first 6 or 7 verses, very practical. Then we're going to take a deep dive into some cosmology that lets us know that, number one, the guys during Job's day knew more about the creation of this earth and the structure of this earth and how it's set up than all the NASA scientists put together. Okay, and so we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And so as you're turning to Job 22, let me remind you about Wedstrong. I mean, we're coming up literally a month from right now. We will be at it. Today is November 9th. December 8th through the 10th is when we are in Nashville for Wedstrong. If you haven't went online and signed up for this is at wedstrong.com, or you can go to our church website, kellyharbin.org, and get signed up for this. I don't know what we're at total right now. There was like 116 couples as of Sunday, and so please get signed up for that. And so that we can get your name on the list and we can get rolling on that. So, Job 22, all right? We're going to start, number one, with God's prophet of your life, okay? And we're going to talk about a little bit of practicality. And here's the interesting thing. We are in Job 22, starting round 3, where each friend comes, and we're back to Eliphaz, the oldest guy. Okay, and Eliphaz is going to present his case, and he's done this twice already. This is his third round of doing this. Now we're going to go in here, and you got to understand, it just keeps digressing. It just keeps getting worse and worse as each round of each friend keeps calling out Job, and then Job calls them back out. And what we saw in last week's was Job's rebuttal to them, and now all of a sudden we're on the third round, and it's Eliphaz that's doing this. And so we're going to start with God's prophet of your life tonight, and I want you to look at here in the 5 verses. It says, "Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, Can a man be profitable unto God, as he that is wise may be profitable unto himself?" In other words, he's saying, Job, really, let's just be honest with you. You're holding to this position that you've done nothing wrong, that there is no secret sin in your life. Really, what profit is that doing God for you withholding that? What profit is it doing God if you just sit there and continue to hang on to your little position, which is, I've done nothing wrong here. God's just putting me through this, and I'd like to have a meeting with God. And Eliphaz is like, what's your problem, man? What good is that going to bring God for you to continue with this position of innocency? And he goes on in verse 3 and he says, "Is it any pleasure to the Almighty that thou art righteous, or it to gain to him that thou makest thy ways perfect?" In other words, you keep maintaining your righteousness, Job. Is that helping God any? No, it's not. So therefore, Job, you just need to confess that you're a sinner and that you've committed sin against God. And man, here's the deal, Job. Your problem is God doesn't need you, but yet you keep holding to your position. Now watch this. I've added Job 21:15 in there, and we're gonna go look at that in just a second. But let's read the next 2 verses. He says, "He will reprove thee for fear of thee." In other words, will he reprove thee for fear of thee? In other words, will God have some fear of your life and go, oh man, I need to correct Job here? And he says, will he enter in with thee into judgment? Now remember, Job multiple times has came into this place where he feels like, I just want a meeting with God. You ever felt like you needed one of them? Just, man, God, I just need to have a sit down, a face-to-face, and let's get this worked out. And literally what Eliphaz is saying, Job, who are you to think God, this almighty God, has time to even deal with you? To even deal with your little problem, when if you just confess it before him, this would go away. Now I'm going to come back to Job 21:15 in just a second. And he goes on, he says, "Is not thy wickedness great, and thy iniquities infinite?" In other words, you know what your problem is, Job? You're just a sinner. And if you just get your heart right with God, this thing would go away. But he asked the question, And he says, he's basically asking, can a man be profitable unto God? He says, what pleasure, what profit does God get out of you holding and maintaining your position? Now, this is a kickback to what Job said in Job 21:15, literally last week. Remember when Job said this? What is the Almighty that we should serve him, and what profit should we have if we pray unto him? Now remember, Job was quoting the wicked man when he said this. So this is not Job's opinion of saying, what do we get out of this? And what Eliphaz is using that is to say, oh, that's right. Job, you know what your problem is? You served God when you got something out of it. But now that God's taken all that away, you don't want to serve him no more? Which is funny because Job has not implied that at all. And he's going, yeah, you're calling out the wicked man saying he only served God because of what he could get out of it. Job, you're guilty of that very thing. Now this is interesting. Do you remember who the first person was to accuse Job for only serving God for what he could get out of him? Let's go back to chapter 1, verse 8. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And verse 9, and Satan answered the Lord and said, doeth Job fear God for naught? In other words, do you honestly think Job is doing all this serving of you, God, because of nothing? No, it's what he could get out of it. So let me ask you something. So Eliphaz, he's a good man, by the way. He's just a good man being used by Satan at this moment. Who do you think is put in the thoughts of Eliphaz to call out Job this way? Job, you're only serving God for what you can get out of it, buddy. And now that God's taken all that away, look at you. Who do you think that was? It's Satan. Which tells me and you, if Eliphaz is a good man and a friend of Job's, who are you and I to think at some point Satan can't use you and I, and he put the very thoughts of himself into you to speak it to people? That's why we have to be so guarded what we say. And we have to be so guarded how we talk to other people, because if we're not careful, it'll actually be Satan speaking through us. And for those of you that that you think I'm wrong on this, and I keep going back to these verses, remember Matthew 16. Hey guys, who do men say that I am? Oh, you're this guy, you're that guy, you're this guy. Yeah, who do you say I am? Well, then he says, well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. What blessed are thou, Peter? Here's the keys of the kingdom. 5 verses later, he looks at the same Peter and said, get thee behind me, Satan. Which means every one of us in this room are susceptible to being used by Satan to work against the actual plan of God when we have all the great intentions in the world. Let me remind you that Cain brought all of his fruits and vegetables to an offering to God with good intentions. They were the wrong offering, but it was good intentions. And God rejected it. It's not your intentions that matter. All right? Now, so and then we get into Eliphaz's pronounced slander of Job. Now watch this. You ever notice that as you debate people, if you give them enough time and you keep defeating them, they'll get so frustrated they'll resort to lying. Now watch this, okay? So they're looking at Job, verse 6 and 10. Now, he's went from the position of Job, you got to have a hidden sin in your life, buddy. That's why all this has happened. You got this hidden sin, if you just get it out there. Look here in verse 6, though. He says, for thou hast taken a pledge from thy brother for naught, and stripped the naked of their clothing. He literally said, you've given these bad loans out to your brethren so you can make a profit off of it. And then he goes on, he says, you've stripped the naked of their clothing. Thou hast not given water to the weary to drink, and thou hast withholden bread from the hungry. But as for the mighty man, now this verse right here, and I believe it's verse 8, now watch this, I've got it in red. He says, but as for the mighty man, he had the earth, and the honorable man dwelleth in it. In other words, if you can't read that verse with sarcasm, you're not going to understand it. What he's saying is, oh, you did all these things, but you, the mighty man, Job, oh, you had it all. Now look at you. And the issue is this. He is accusing Job of literally treating the poor and the naked and the widows and the fatherless bad. Now, here's what's interesting. Did he? Now watch this. We're going somewhere. All right, now watch. If you walk a certain way in this world, when people cannot stand you, what they'll eventually do, if they can't get nothing on you, they'll eventually lie about you. This is what they did to Jesus. You ever read the Gospels? They didn't have nothing on him, and what happens is they start accusing him of stuff. Like, oh, he didn't wash his hands. Like, this is what we call slander. They're making it up. And I've always felt like this, especially when I was the lead pastor. Guys, you don't have to make up lies. If you study enough, you'll find enough problems. Okay? I've got enough issues in my own life. You ain't going to have to make nothing up. Okay? So the bottom line is, but what happens is, what people will start doing is when they're downgrading you and talking about you, they'll start making up lies. And it always happens that way. And I've always said this about church people, guys, you got to be careful about the gossip. Because what you're going to find out when you start listening to gossip, understand who you're listening to it from. And here's one thing I want you to learn. The person talking trash about that person over there will talk trash about you. I don't care who it is. So what happens is, here's Eliphaz, who he is just bent out of shape. I can't get Job to act right, do right, and so now I'm going to start calling him out. I'm going to call out sin. Guys, there is nothing wrong with calling out sin if you're telling the truth. Job, he goes on, he says, thou hast sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless have been broken. Therefore snares are round about to thee, and sudden fear troubleth thee. In other words, your problem is, Job, why this snare, this fear that has come upon you, is because how you treated all these people. You notice his positions changed, went from you got a hidden sin to, oh, I know what your sin is. Now watch this. Job says in Job 31, he says, if I have withheld from the poor their desire, or have caused the eye of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel myself alone, and the fatherless have eaten thereof, for from my youth he was brought up with me as with a father, I have guided therefore from my mother's womb. If I have seen any perish for want of clothing, or any poor without covering, if the lions had not blessed me, and if he were not warned with the fleece of my sheep, if I have lifted up my hands against the fatherless, when I saw my help in the gate, then let mine arm fall from my shoulder blade, and my arm be broken from the bone. In other words, he's saying, listen, if I've done any of that thing, let those things happen to me. Now, Eliphaz says you're ripping off the poor and you're treating people bad. Job says, I'm treating the poor great, and I'm treating everybody else great. So who do you believe? Well, who do we believe? I mean, watch this. Why don't we call God to the stand? What does God say in verse 1 of the very book we're studying? God says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that was a perfect and an upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. So was Eliphaz telling the truth? No, he's flat out lying. So here's a question. You're going to be put into a position at some point in life where two people are going to be telling you two different stories about the same event. And the question becomes, what do? Who do you believe? Well, in this case, we just call God. God, what did you say about Job? So it's very easy to figure out if Job or Eliphaz is telling the truth, because God takes the witness stand and says, my man Job. You want to know how to handle that in the future? You ever remember the story that these two women came to Solomon? And I won't bore you with the whole story, but the bottom line is, one lady had a baby, it died. Another had a baby that lived. So the lady that had the baby that died snuck in, grabbed the other one, took the baby, and so she was going to keep that one for herself. Well, it all comes down to, that's my baby. No, it's not. It's my baby. You know, that kind of thing. So they bring it to Solomon. And they're like, what are you going to do, man? Whose baby is it? And both women are going, it's mine. So what does he do? He says, well, I'll tell you what, pull out a sword and we'll cut the baby in half and give parts to each woman. And the woman who's really the mother of that child said, no, let her have it. And he knew right then who the real mother was. Well, the point of it, and you say, okay, what's the point? The point is the story is teaching you and I that when those problems comes in our life and we have two people telling us the same event, two different stories, what do? You pull out a sword. What is the sword? Right? What is it? There you go. Okay, we're a little quiet again tonight. Wednesday nights are getting rough, guys. I mean, I tell a few jokes last week and you guys just stare at me. I had to tell it again Sunday to at least get a laugh from it. All right? Now, time change, that's the problem? You guys stay up till midnight anyway. I'm the guy that goes to bed. I would have been, a week ago, I'd have been long asleep. And I'm the one with the energy here, all right? So now, bottom line is, now we're going to be looking at, now that we've gotten through the practical, now watch what happens. We're going to start pointing to the heights of heaven now, okay? Verse 12. Is not God in the heights of heaven? Now this is going to get interesting because we're about to take a left turn off a cliff. We've been very practical. Job, your problem is you're doing all these things wrong. You got sin in your life, buddy. What profit do you think it's doing for God for you to maintain your righteousness? And you keep wanting to have a meeting with God. Why would God, the Almighty, want to come down out of heaven and deal with you right now? This is the context, so stay with it. But in verse 12, he says, is not God in the height of heaven? Question mark. And behold, the height of the stars, how high are they? Now, practically or historically speaking, Eliphaz is like, listen, buddy, you keep saying you want to have a meeting with God, Job. Why don't you look up and see how high God is above us? That's what he's saying historically. But what he's about to lay down doctrinally and prophetically, even this man had no idea what he was saying. But he's about to give you the laws of cosmology, and nobody questions it. And what I mean by that is, when he starts to lay down certain facts of where God is, Job doesn't go, what are you talking about? Bildad doesn't go, Eliphaz, what are you talking about? The whole crew is sitting around going, yeah, we all know this. Do you understand that every man in the age of Job's age understood cosmology and they understood science better than you and I ever will? Now, there's a reason I'm going ape crazy here tonight, because I'm going somewhere with my thought process when it comes to science. Okay? Now hang with me. He says, verse 13, and thou sayest, how doeth God know? Can he judge through the dark cloud? So in other words, practically speaking, Job, God sees it all. Prophetically or doctrinally speaking, what do you think he means, that dark cloud? Okay? Do you think that word dark cloud is saying, well, Job's having a bad time and it's kind of like living in a dark cloud? No, that is not what he's talking about. He's talking about a very specific cloud that is darkened. Now watch. He says, thick clouds are a covering to him that he seeth not, and he walketh in the circuit of heaven. Now here, just to fill you in, I'm not even going to get to that circuit of heaven thing until next week. But a circuit is a path that is a circle. That's what electrical current is. It runs a circuit, comes into a circular form. But you're going to find out that it's not just God that walks in this circular path or this circuit of heaven. If you keep reading into the next couple verses, you're going to find out ancient men of old walked in the same path. Now, what are you going to do with that when the Bible starts talking to you about men walking in a path in heaven? I'm not talking about a path on this earth. Read the scripture. Now watch this. Okay, so we got to break this thing down. He's going, Job, God's in the height of heaven. Behold, the height of the stars, how high are they? Man, do you think he can't see you through that dark cloud? Man, he's got a dark cloud that covers him, a thick cloud that stops us from seeing him, but he can see us. Now watch, all right? Isaiah 57:15. For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. Watch this. I dwell in a high and holy place. Now, I want you to get into your head that heaven, the throne room of God, is in a geographical location. It is not an aura. It's not a mindset. Those of ours, that loved ones of ours that have died and went to be with the Lord, went to a geographical location. It's in a specific direction. And this is interesting because God calls it the north. Okay? The north of what? Now, I don't care if you're heliocentric. I don't care if you're geocentric. I don't care if you're a globalist. I don't care if you're a flat earther. None of that is what I'm trying to prove tonight. I have thoughts. Most of those thoughts I don't put on YouTube, okay? Now, most of them I don't even speak in here. But however, where is north from here? North where? Straight up, right? Okay, so is straight up from here, straight up from Australia too? Would that be going in the same? If I shot a laser, if I walked straight outside, shot a laser beam, a really powerful laser beam straight up, and my mate down in Australia pumped a same laser beam, would they point at the exact same spot? Now, don't look at me cross-eyed. If you've got all this figured out, then answer that question. Now watch this, okay? He says it's in a high and holy place. With him also that is a contrite, humble spirit receives the Spirit. Okay, now, Isaiah 14. This is Satan when he was Lucifer, right? And at the time he's on this earth in Eden, the garden of God, and this is long time before Adam shows up. And he's in Eden, the garden of God. You said, where do you get that? Ezekiel 28, but we're not going there tonight. But here's where he's at. And he says, for thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. So, basic understanding of English. In order to ascend in heaven, wherever he was, earth, heaven has to be above it. Because you can't ascend to something that is beside you or below you. It has to be above you. Okay, he goes on, he says, I will exalt my throne up above the stars of God. So wherever Satan wants to ascend to and take his throne to, it's above the stars. Okay? Not below the stars. Above him. It's a geographical location. I will sit also in the mount of the congregation in the sides, plural, of the north, which means the world has more. Okay, the construct of how we're designed can't be a square, can't be a cube. You say, how do you know it's not a cube? Because if it was a cube, it would be the side singular of the north, but it's sides. Now I'll get to that in a minute. He says, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. He just said, I'm going to be above the stars of God. Do you honestly think he's talking about the same clouds you saw today? Stay in context with the verse. He's already said, I'm going to ascend to heaven. Where? Above the stars. Where? Above those clouds. Well, he left the planet a long time ago. Which clouds are you talking about? Okay, now hang with me. All right? NASA. Never a straight answer. That's what that means. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain why I don't like NASA, why I don't trust anything they say. I double check all kinds of stuff. Guys, I don't want to go nuts, but you've never seen the earth. Every picture you've ever seen of the earth to NASA's admission is CGI. Okay? Now, the reason I'm bringing this out and the reason we're going to spend so much time, and I'm going to be dealing with a lot tonight that a lot of you have already heard, but we're putting it in context with Job 22 here. Okay, now check this out. This whole thing of trying to understand, anytime I start to break down and rip on NASA, the first question out of an individual's mouth is, well, what would be the point of them lying? Right? Always, why? What are they going to get out of lying? Well, first of all, the first and easiest answer to that is, do you know how much of your tax money gets filtered through that place? That's first. Always follow the money. But second, this whole thing of creation is a big deal. Because if I can rob you of where you actually live, then everything else is off. Oh, by the way, just a little side note. Do you know who started NASA? The Nazis. We took Werner von Braun in Operation Paperclip, along with a bunch of other guys, over from the Nazis when we won the war, and we put them in charge of NASA. Now, do you think just maybe the Nazi dudes may have not had God as their primary source of information when it comes to cosmology? I mean, think maybe they might have been off just a hair. You say, well, Corey, you're not no astrophysicist. You're right, I'm not. I'm just a moron who believes the Bible. And a lot of what you're told, now here's what's funny. Those of you that want to defend the blue marble picture and defend Nash's belief, let me remind you, the same dudes that tell you about where you live in cosmology are the same people that say you come from a monkey. Now, are you good with evolution too? So we're going to trust the Bible when it comes to our origin of man, but then we're not going to trust the Bible when it comes to outer space? Like, how do you reason that in your head? Now, so I'm ripping on this, and I'm going to a reason why for just a second. All right. Now I want you to look at Job 11. This is going back a few chapters, but we got into this and we saw where he said, "Canst thou by searching find out God? Canst thou find out the Almighty unto perfection?" Now remember, Eliphaz stating, Job, there's a thick cloud. You can't even see God, but God can see you. But we go back to chapter 11, and he says, can you even find God? Where's he at? Now watch this. Is it as high as heaven? What canst thou do? Deeper than hell. Now watch, I'm wanting you to pay attention to these verses. What canst thou know? The measure thereof is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. So he asks in verse 7, can you find out the Almighty? And notice he starts to lay out 4 dimensions, not 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions. And he tells you, man, can you even figure out God? Man, can you figure out the height of heaven, the depth of hell? It's longer than the earth, the broader than the sea. Man, we're trying to figure out where the Almighty is. And he gives you 4 dimensions. Now watch this. Ephesians 3:17. Now, this is a misunderstood set of verses, but I want you to pay attention to, this is going to be a short English class, and I know nothing about English other than to halfway speak it. Right? Now watch. He's talking to the Ephesian church, and he says, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, semicolon. Now, I'm not a genius on punctuation, but I know punctuation matters. Every teacher I ever had told me that. Right? And by the way, remove punctuations in some of your text, and you can start a fight. You ever seen that? Well, if you don't handle your writing right, it changes the whole deal. He said, being rooted and grounded in love, all right? Verse 18. May be able. Now, notice that was a comma. Now we're starting a secondary, independent phrase within the sentence. He says, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is, now watch this, breadth, length, depth, height, four-dimensional. Notice what it ends with. That's called a semicolon. Once again, I don't even know how to explain all that, but I can tell you this much. What I just read means stop. That is an independent phrase within a sentence. Now watch. And to know the love of Christ which passeth knowledge. The average person comes to this verse, and the modern Bibles change this verse so that we say, hey, that we may know what is the height, depth, width, all that of the love of Christ. But that's not what the verse says. He doesn't say that we may be able to comprehend with all the saints the breadth, the length, the depth, the height, and to know the love of Christ. That semicolon can't be just phased over. It stops. And then he starts with the word and, meaning you need to know this and that you know that. So what is he doing here when he says breadth, length, depth, and height? He's going right back to Job 11, giving you the four dimensions. What profit does NASA get out of lying to you? Because when you lose creation, you lose God. Why do you think it's been so pushed on kids for the last 150 years? And it came out of Germany, by the way. Wonder where NASA came from. Came out of Germany with philosophers about pumping no God. And Nietzsche and all that other stuff. Now watch this. If I can get rid of your creation, I can get rid of your God. And if I can get you to question how you got here, then I can get you to question on who got you here. And God says, you want to know me? You need to study. What do I need to study, God? 4 dimensions. And he's letting you know about this whole thing. Now check this out. For those of you who go, what has this got to do with Job? Hang with me. Job has spent chapter after chapter after chapter. I want a meeting with God. I need God to show up. I need him to explain some things to me. God finally shows up. And do you know what God does at the end? He never tells him about what happened to him. He gives him a dissertation on what? Creation. Wait a minute. The man just lost every kid he's got. All of his wealth. His health's gone. His wife is batty. Which, listen, we all got that. So, at the end of the day, what's going to help this man? Who would have ever thought to go into a guy who absolutely is on the verge of the nut house and go, hey, buddy, let me help you out. Okay, great. What you going to tell me? Let me tell you about creationism. And you think it's not that important? So what does NASA profit by lying to you? Because God knows, man, if you can figure this thing out, you can find him. Literally, everything around you was designed. Romans 1:20, everything was designed to point to the Godhead. Literally, that's what the verse says. So that's why everything's made in threes. All right, now hang with me. Now, Job 22:11. We're back, Job 22:12. Let's go back to this verse. The heights of the heaven. Canst thou judge through the dark cloud? The thick clouds are his covering. He walks through the circuit. We'll get to the circuit later. All right? We get to Job chapter 26 and verse 7. If you know the first 6 verses of Job 26, it is what we call the pretest for the judgment seat of Christ, right? Okay, bottom line is, he goes into verse 7 after basically giving you the pretest, and he says, he stretcheth out his north over the empty place. Now remember, we found out his throne is in the north. Okay, the stars of the north. Now hang with me. So he hangs out, he stretcheth out the north, that's where his throne's going to be, over the empty place. So whatever's under the throne is empty. Hang. He bindeth up the waters in a thick cloud, and the clouds is not rent under them. Notice the word rent. I won't get to that tonight, but hang with me on that. He holdeth back the face of his throne and spreadeth his cloud upon it. Job tells you in chapters 26, you know why you can't see heaven tonight? Because he's hiding it. What is he hiding it with? A thick cloud. And we ain't talking about, what are those circular, what are those clouds we talk about all the time that we fly in? The cumulus. That's the one that's in my mind, okay? Now, we're talking about clouds off planet. And you go, oh, that's nuts. Really? Because NASA talks to you about Magellan's cloud. You good with them? So when I tell you about God's cloud, you go, oh, you're crazy. Yeah, you can't believe that. That can't be what the verse is saying. All right? Now, notice this. The North Pole, right? The North Star. It's not really north, but it's kind of north, and it moves a little. But I want you to notice, this is Polaris, right? And all the other stars go around that, and it's due north of this place. It just so happens that all the other stuff, kind of rotates around that. I won't go to some places I could go right now, but let's just talk about the North Star for a second. In recent years, there has been much speculation as to what exactly is behind the North Star, Polaris. Polaris, as described by NASA, is actually three close stars. In other words, it's one star, or seen as one star, but it's three stars. Romans 1:20 says that I made everything to look like the Godhead. So when we look up at the North Star pointing due north, what do we see? Three stars is one star. Gee, I couldn't tell you why God would do that. Okay, now watch, he goes on. He says 3 is an important number, mind you. NASA has also discovered that unlike any other star, look at this. This is NASA's words. There is an empty space behind the North Star, and there is the star, and then behind it, empty space more so than any other heavenly body. So they say, man, you can look this way, look that way, and you can see in each dimension, or not dimension, but just different levels of space. You look past the North Star, which is 3 stars seen as one, there is nothing. It's empty space. Well, that's amazing, because we just read Job says he stretched out the north over the empty place. Once again, NASA's catching up with the Bible. Don't look at me like my Bible's obsolete. It's so far more advanced. And by the way, Job and his 3 boys could teach NASA things they didn't even know existed. And remember, the way schooling teaches you is they want to point back to this generation and act like they're a bunch of dumb goat herders. And they know more about life than you and I could ever imagine. Now, so that we dealt with the North Star, but let's look back here. He says, listen, we know it's this empty place, and he's being hidden, and he's got these clouds, and he's got this dark cloud, and it's covering his throne. Now, I want you to understand there are 3 heavens, right? We're gonna walk through this, and many of you have seen me go through this. There are 3 heavens, and I hope you can agree with me without making me go to Paul and explain all that, right? There's 3 of them. We got 3 heavens. Heaven 1, where you get in your plane in Delta and you fly around and you do all that thing. You watch the birds fly, the clouds, the cumulus clouds, the clouds you and I get to see, they're here. Then we got heaven number 2, which is where the stars of God are. Okay? Then you got heaven number 3, which is the throne room of God, which is in the north. Okay? And it's in a high and lofty geographical location. Heaven's not over here, over there. It is in a very specific spot. Okay? And God says, you can't see the bright lights there. Why not, God? I've taken my cloud and I've covered it. And then I've added this empty space. Then there's the North Star, then there's y'all. He's Southern. Okay? Now, watch this, all right? Now, you guys have seen me do this a lot, but hang with me, okay? Psalms 148, 1 through 7. Praise ye the Lord from the heavens. Praise ye him in the heights. Now, remember Eliphaz in verse 12 said God is where? In the heights. So we're talking about the throne room of God. Praise ye him, all his angels, praise ye all the hosts. Now, would you agree that's heaven number 3? That's the throne room of God. Praise ye him, sun, moon. Praise ye all the stars of light. Praise ye heavens of heavens. And we would all agree that that's heaven number 2. Now I'll come back to it. Then you drop down to the yellow part and it says, praise the Lord from the earth, ye dragons and all the deeps, fire, hail, storm, vapor, stormy winds, fulfilling his word, mountains and all his fruitful trees and cedars. Okay, so now we're talking about heaven number 1, where the birds fly. But I want you to notice in red, he says, and ye waters that be above the heavens. So now notice, we have the throne room of God in blue, heaven number 2 in red, and he says there's some waters above those. So God says, I've got some water above this planet far bigger than the Pacific and Atlantic and Indian and all of them put together. I mean, we've got water above the stars. Where's it at? Well, if you go due north and look straight up, you see Polaris, but NASA agrees with the Bible. There's an empty space. Then what? We can't see it. Why can't we see it? Because God says, I'm going to hide back the face of my throne, and you're not going to be allowed to see it. Okay, once again, God's throne is not off in some woo dimension. It's in the very dimension that you and I live in. And our loved ones haven't went off into some distant land. They went to a geographical location above Polaris, above the empty space, above the clouds, above that water, and into the throne room, which is the blue. Okay, now hang with me. So you guys have seen me lay this out for a good 15 years in this church. Okay, now I'm just going to be honest with you. I leave it up here, but I have a whole different thing in my head on how it's laid out now. But for the sake of blowing your minds and thinking I'm a nut job, which you probably do already, so who cares? But we're going to go with my original design. Now, my new design is not much different. This area in the middle is a little different, but it's the same system. Okay? And what's went down is the throne room of God is up here, and I believe it's in the shape of a pyramid. That's why he talks about the sides of the north, not the side of the north. Okay? Which, if you have a pyramid and you go up to the top, the north side, if it was a square, it would be flat. It would be the side of the north. If it was a ball, you would have one side, the north, and it'd be the side of the north. But if it's a pyramid, and it comes to that point, you have sides, plural. But that's, once again, if you don't buy that it's in a pyramid, I don't really care. It's not a Bible doctrine. It's just my theory. Okay? Now, so we got the throne room of God. We have the water of Psalms 148, the water above the stars, that's heaven number 2, and then somewhere in the midst of all that little whatever is our earth with the first heaven. Now, what's interesting, just a little side note for you online and see if I can maybe get kicked off. If this is really what it is, and you're telling me that my truck is responsible for global warming, sun flares coming off our sun, supposedly 93 million miles away. Those sun flares are hundreds of times bigger than the earth, but yet my truck is the problem. Just laying that out, okay? This water is where Leviathan is, and at the top of it is what we know as the Sea of Glass, or the Crystal Sea. Now, Genesis 1:2 calls this body of water that's above the stars the deep. So when God speaks of the deep in the Bible, he's not talking about the ocean on this planet. He's not talking about the Mediterranean. He's speaking of this water system that's above the stars. Okay, so we'd come back and we'd call this area here the deep. Okay, now, by the way, just a little side note, we call this the universe. Science calls that. You ever broke that word down? Una, one, verse, that means to speak. Now, isn't it interesting that we are the nut jobs because we believe that God spoke the universe into existence, but yet they steal our word? They think a Big Bang did it. Well, then don't call it the universe. Come up with your own name. All right, now, bottom line, Genesis says it's on the face of the deep, and here's what happened. The earth was without form or void. And I'm not going to go into too deep, but this rock that you're floating on, this earth, is older than 6,000 years. It was recreated 6,000 years ago, and you and I got to live on it through Adam. But the actual rock that you're floating on has been around for a long time. Ezekiel 28 lets you know it was here long before Adam got here. And something went down between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and people go, oh, you're a gap theorist. Well, first of all, let me just stop you and say, number one, if anything, I'm a gap factist, not a theorist. But second of all, most people that teach the gap are trying to explain dinosaurs. I'm not trying to explain anything about dinosaurs. I don't even know if the dinosaurs existed. Right? And I definitely don't believe in fossil fuel. But that's a whole nother setup. All right? Now, and by the way, that word was created in the 60s too. Now, here's the thing. So Genesis 1:2, we got a problem on this planet, and it's flooded out. Not just the planet, but space is flooded out. And here's what God says, okay? Genesis 1:2, verse 6. And God said, let there be a firmament. Now, don't answer this out loud, but ask yourself, what's a firmament? And the reason I want you to ask that is because whatever the firmament is, God says on day 4, he put the sun and the moon in the firmament. So if you're a 93 million miles away from here kind of guy, you have to believe that this firmament is what? All of outer space? And if the firmament is all of outer space, and you're buying into NASA, they're telling me that the universe has no end and it keeps expanding every year. So what's a firmament? Because whatever the firmament is, there's a body of water above it. Okay, now hang with me. He says, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Now you understand that the word midst means the center of the water, right? And he says, I want you to let it divide the waters from the waters. Now, to divide something and get water here and water here, it means it's literally divided in half. Right? This is real deep stuff. We can teach some math out of this. So he's going to divide this deep that God was moving upon the face of. And what he does is he takes half of it, moves it up. He takes half of it, moves it down. And so what we do is we got this space in the middle, and he tells you in verse 7, and God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which are above the firmament, and it was so, and God called the firmament heaven. Which heaven? Now, it's funny because there's a village idiot, and that's what I think he is, out in Tucson, Arizona, who's supposedly a King James guy, but he's just a loudmouth. Imagine that, me saying that about somebody else. And he's just a loudmouth, and he goes, no, there is, and when you try to explain this situation that the sun and the moon are in the firmament. He says no, because what God did was create 3 firmaments. That's why you get 3 heavens. That's not what it says. There is one heaven spoken of here, and there's a gap. There's water above it, water below it, and the water that's below it ends up forming, because what happens the very next day, this is day 2, day 3, the dry land starts to appear, and the water starts to divide up and creates what? The oceans that we have on this planet. Okay, now, Amos 5:8. Seek him that maketh the 7 stars in Orion. So would you agree that verse 8, the context is outer space? The 7 stars are Pleiades, okay? The 3 sisters. It's what we can go in and compare Revelation 2 and 3 to. Now watch this. He's letting you know Orion. You got Orion's belt. If you go out tonight on a clear night, you can see this really good. All right? So the context is outer space. And he said, and turneth the shadow of death into morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that he calleth for the waters of the sea. Do you honestly think, context-wise, this verse is talking about the oceans on this planet? He says, context, the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. When you start studying Genesis flood, there was a lot of water that hit this planet. And it came from the deep. And the windows of heaven opened, and they came onto this planet. Now, I'm going somewhere. I'm just laying out a lot of stuff. So we got the deep up here, the windows of heaven open, and they come down. Now watch. Sea of glass. Let's deal with this sea of glass thing, okay? And what I'm doing right now is giving you little snippets, and we'll eventually pull it all in together. Definitely won't be doing it tonight. Now watch. Job 38, 29, 31. Out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of heaven? Who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. There's that frozen water that's above the stars, which is called the deep. And he says the face of it, it's frozen. He calls it the hoary frost of heaven. And you say, I don't think he's talking about that. I think he's probably talking about Antarctica, which is a whole new story, but or the Arctic Ocean. That's what I think he's talking about. Okay. What's the context? Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades and loosen the bands of Orion? Notice every time he goes to talking about this deep, he gives you that little nugget. Because he's trying to let you know, don't get hooked up with the Pacific Ocean. Don't be getting your mind on the Arctic. I want you to get off planet when you think of this. All right? Revelation 4:6. When you go up to heaven, we have a throne there, and it says before the throne there was a sea of glass likened unto crystal. What's crystal like? It's hard, right? This sea of glass, they're standing on it. And the throne is in the middle of it. And so do you understand that when you and I eventually get raptured, and yeah, we're getting raptured, when we get raptured off this planet, you know where you're going to be standing? On the frozen tundra of the sea of glass. And you're going to be wrapped around. You say, how do you know that? Because chapter 4 is about us being there. And you're going to be standing on the very frozen of the deep. Okay? And right below you is going to be this body of ocean. You know where you're going to be at? In the north. And right below that is that empty spot. Now watch. Job 37, 14 and 24. Hearken unto this, O Job, and stand still. This is when God finally speaks to Job. And considerest the wondrous works of God. Doest thou know when God disposed them and caused the light of his cloud to shine? Doest thou know when the balancing of the clouds and the wondrous works of him that is perfect in knowledge? How thy garments are worn when the quiet the earth with a south wind? Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong, and as a molten looking glass. He's describing the same thing, the crystal sea. Right? Teach us what we shall say unto him, for we cannot order our speech by reason of darkness. In other words, we can't even talk to him. There's a dark spot between us and God. It's a molten looking glass. It's a sea. It's a sea called the deep, and it's a frozen, hoary frost. And the face of that deep is frozen, okay? He says, teach us that we may say, okay, he goes on, he says, and now men see not, look at this, now men see not the bright lights which is in the clouds, but the wind passeth and cleanseth them. Fair weather cometh out of the north. With God is terrible majesty. Touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. Why? He's hidden his throne, and it's hidden back, and Eliphaz knew it. Job, you may not be able to look up and see him, buddy, but he sees it all. All that sin you're creating in your life, Job, God sees it all. Now, he knew more about cosmology than you and I ever did. Now, watch. All right, Job 36:29. Also, can any understand the spreading of the clouds and the noise of his tabernacle? Now, when did Job live? Job's pre-Moses, right? Would we all agree? What tabernacle are we talking about? There's no tabernacle on this planet. Matter of fact, if you understand the book of Hebrews, when God decided to build a tabernacle on this planet, he snatched Moses off planet and said, look and see my tabernacle. Now go down and build one like it. Now, not quite in those words, but I'm just paraphrasing for you. Okay? The tabernacle, and he says, listen, he says, there's a noise up there, but there's clouds holding it back. Behold, he spreadeth his light upon it and covereth the bottom of the sea. What sea? That deep, right? He says, for the judgeth the people he giveth them abundance. With clouds he covereth the light and commandeth it not to shine, but the cloud that come betwixt. You know what betwixt means? In the middle of, right? You're here, he's there, there's a cloud in the betwixt, in the middle, in the midst. It's stopping us from seeing him. Job 38:6-11. Whereupon the foundation thereof fastened, who had laid the cornerstones thereof, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted with joy? Who shut up the sea with doors? What sea? The deep. He shut it up with doors, when it brake forth as he hath issued out of the womb. When I made the cloud the garment thereof, the thick darkness of swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place. He literally said, I made a frozen water to be doors, to break up, to stop my decreed place, the throne room, from access. It ain't just keeping you and I out of there. Watch this. He goes on, he says, I've set bars and doors and said, hereto shall thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. You know who he just spoke to? Satan. You know what he's doing? Satan right now is at the throne room accusing the brethren. Every day. You say, what do you mean he can only come up to? The reason why the top of the face is not only holding back God's throne from us seeing it, it is frozen because Satan can only come up to that far and stop. So when everybody goes, well, how does Satan enter into the throne room and God still be holy? He doesn't. He gets right up there and he says, you can come up here too and no further. And this is where your proud waves stop. You know why he has waves? He's Leviathan. All right? Now, Psalms 102, verse 6. O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who covereth thyself with lights as the garment, who stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain. Look at this. Who lays his beams of his chambers in the water. Right now, the throne is sitting with beams sitting in the water, and that water's frozen. Now, I'm out of time. Next week, we're going to come in here and continue it on. You're going, okay, why do I need to know all this? And how are you getting all this just out of Job? Well, first of all, have you noticed most of cosmology that we speak to you about comes out of the book of Job? He's not an idiot. None of those men are. Right? But my point of bringing all this out is because, guys, everybody always wants to know is, oh, what good could NASA get out of lying to us? Because if they can stop you from understanding creation, you will not understand God correctly. It's impossible. Okay, I'm closing with this thought. Do you understand guys like Andy Stanley look at you and go, who cares about Genesis? We just want to talk about Jesus. Well, who is this Jesus if I don't have Genesis? Really, how do I work all that out in my mind and go, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to ditch all that and just focus upon Jesus and what he did, as though he just plopped out of nowhere, died on a cross for you and I? Is that the story? No. He's God in human flesh who left that throne room, came down through that deep, came to this earth and died for you and I, and ascended back up through that deep to sit on a throne in heaven right now. You can't just ditch your Old Testament. It explains every reason why he came, right? And so therefore, it's important we get cosmology down, and we'll dive into it for the next 2 weeks. So, all right, God bless you. We'll see you next week.